Good morning. I'd like to call this special Darien Board of Education curriculum meeting to order. It's Thursday, December 7th in the Darien Public Schools Administrative Offices. I'd like to open with the election of a committee chairperson. Do I have a nomination? Robin?
I'd like to nominate Sarah for chairman.
Okay, do I have a second? Okay, thank you. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you, Sarah. I'll turn the meeting over to you.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, everybody, for your support. I'm excited to chair this committee again, and we've got some good work to do. Our agenda today, or first, our next meeting is scheduled for January 11th, for those of you following along. Our agenda today will be a literacy update, talking about the results. Good morning, Greg. The results of the waiver. We will learn about instructional technology integration, and then we'll talk about some job-embedded professional learning. I will turn the floor over to Dr. Fettigan to start us off.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Mrs. Stroller and I are happy today to provide a literacy update, which will share some information that the board has certainly heard before about our current curriculum, instructional practices, and resources. And then, of course, an update on the long-awaited waiver decisions that were shared with about 90 districts throughout the state. And so we'll take care of this together, and I'll advance the slides through here.
We got a chance we can get the slides up here.
Yes. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll walk everyone through today the actual waiver decision. We want to remind everyone about what the legislation indicates. The waiver did give feedback. The waiver expanded feedback from the original intent from phonemic awareness and phonics and really the science of reading, extended to fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, and there was some feedback around writing in addition. The tool is really called a waiver tool. That's really the rubric that the state used to provide information about indicators in each of those areas. We want to make sure that we engage with the board in a discussion preliminarily about budget implications and talk about next steps in our work. Just as a reminder, I know that the board and certainly anyone who's following along sees us always anchoring back to the core values of the district, remembering about the mission and our vision for what we're really seeking to provide as outcomes for all learners in the school system. So whenever we're discussing anything in the area of curriculum instruction, assessment, professional learning, we should always be anchoring back to these core tenets of our district. So jumping right into the waiver decision, for board members and anybody who's following along, where it says Darien Public Schools Connecticut Waiver 2023, linked there is the original waiver as was submitted. That's also available on the website under the curriculum tab. I know that you can't see here the small writing, but I think it's important to indicate that there is official messaging from the Connecticut State Department of Education. And the highlight there with the yellow arrow just indicates that we were granted a transitional waiver. So districts were either granted full approval, they were indicated a partial waiver, approved for a transitional waiver, or just not at all. All parts of the programs need to change. The fact that we were granted, and Mrs. Stroller and I will both continue to speak about this throughout the presentation, a transitional waiver means that there are some elements of our current curricula and literacy framework that are approved. We'll name what those are. And then there are other parts that need to be supplemented and enhanced as we move forward. And so we'll be talking with the board about the process and providing more detail, of course, and frequent updates throughout as we approach that as a district and system. Here's the actual legislation. I know, again, you can't read the small print here. It's simply the back of the CSDE communication where we had the waiver decision and also a reminder about the legislation and what it requires school districts to do. So everyone can note there that we are required to have a fully implemented and approved comprehensive reading curriculum model or program, meaning that we think about what we've already been approved for, and we also look to the areas where the state has provided feedback for some adjustments, and that needs to be in place by July 1st, 2025. So as it says here, we have this next school year to begin partial implementation, and we'll talk again about what that process will mean for us as an administration and with the board support. Okay, so Mrs. Droller will now take us through each of the areas as the state has provided feedback, and this beginning part will also provide an emphasis on what our curriculum and instruction has supported today.
Thank you. So, phonemic awareness.
I think there's somebody on. Thank you. Sorry.
That's okay. So phonemic awareness and phonics was an area where we did meet expectations. Thank you. And as you it's our primary resource for daily explicit instruction for phonemic awareness, and that's been very successful. Foundations we have been using since 2015. It's our primary resource for daily explicit instruction in phonics in kindergarten through grade 3. We have also been implementing decodable text, and we do use a mix of decodable and patterns, but these are just 2 samples, the jump rope readers and the geodes, which are part of Wilson. So those are things that the state approved. Fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension were not approved. So fluency, our current instructional methods, we do use foundations, letter names, and sounds. We have explicit whole class instruction, as well as targeted small group instruction. And we teach fluency through choral reading, repeated reading, echo reading. That's all part of the shared reading component, use of decodable texts, and partner reading. In terms of vocabulary, our current instructional methods, we do teach vocabulary through orthographic mapping. That's part of the Scarborough's rope, the oral language, and the decoding through interactive read aloud in reading, writing, and discussing books. There are explicit vocabulary lessons as part of our mini lessons, and then during our content area instruction, science and social studies as well. And then we have word walls. And of course, we've implemented our ruler feeling words curriculum, which is all about character and feelings. And there's a transfer there to reading and writing, especially literary texts. Reading comprehension, our current instructional methods, we do provide explicit strategy instruction in comprehension throughout our units of study. And there is a use of learning progressions from kindergarten actually through 8th grade to support comprehension and the trajectory of skills through all levels. Students practice in a wide range of appropriately matched texts with teacher support and feedback. Some of this is through read alouds to build knowledge about a topic across multiple texts, and we have increased our use of increasingly complex texts. So the texts that we use to teach comprehension strategies are at or above grade level. And comprehension is through whole class and small group discussion, which is an integral part of our program. So writing is another area that's part of literacy instruction. Again, we use the units of study, which is aligned to grade level writing standards. We provide, again, that explicit strategy instruction through daily mini lessons, and our focus is on the writing process and the components of high quality writing. Students write across genres. They write narrative, informational, and opinion texts in all grades, kindergarten through 8th. Teachers model with shared writing, which is where the teacher is composing with and in front of students, and mentor text for student models. We include rubrics, checklists, both teacher-facing and student-facing for self-assessment and goal setting, and exemplars, so students have models of what good writing looks like. Professional learning and strategies for the qualities of effective writing is ongoing, as well as assessment and planning for small group instruction. So part of that is looking at our on-demands where students are writing quickly in one writing period without any teacher support, and we look at that. So the waiver feedback tool, which I also believe is attached in your packet and is very, very hard to read. According to the tool, we did not meet the criteria for explicit systematic instruction in the following areas. And we just broke this out again because it is so hard to read, but this is from our rubric. So in rapid automatic naming, letter naming fluency, the feedback from the state was that we noted in our waiver and from our one-to-one meeting, we start with foundational skills, with chunking, with text with various strategies, and then we focus on prosody with examples of dialogue tags. Our current practice, letter naming fluency is a huge component of foundations in kindergarten. We spend from August through January teaching students letter names and sounds. And we have progress monitoring. We've actually developed our own tools, which I believe were shared with the board, about how we monitor progress very frequently, and small group instruction is provided for students who are not meeting our benchmarks. So next steps is to review resources from the state-approved core curriculum for fluency instruction to see where we can enhance our current practice. Vocabulary, again, the feedback was that there was not a clear document that described how vocabulary is addressed in an explicit and systematic approach. And then based on our one-to-one meeting, we shared that new words were taught in a systematic way, that we utilize text sets around a topic or theme to build vocabulary, that we have the ruler feeling word curriculum. And we did say that we would be introducing a new vocabulary curriculum for next year, because that is something that we on our own have already been, we know that that is an area of growth for us. We, again, our current practice, we do use the orthographic mapping. These are all the things that I shared on the previous slide. We teach through interactive read aloud, reading, writing, discussion, content area instruction, and explicit instruction in our mini lessons, use of word walls, and ruler feeling words. Again, next steps in this area for us is to review resources from the state's list. Reading comprehension was another area that the state said we did not provide explicit instruction. We did provide in our waiver examples of strategies used in the units of study, and we included the new units of study. They said that there was not a clear reference to sequential, cumulative, systematic approach to comprehension strategies. And then we explained that read aloud discourse, we showed our fiction and nonfiction learning progression from the units of study, which is aligned to the Common Core standards. And we explained that text becomes increasingly complex. So again, our current practice, explicit strategy instruction through the units of study. And our units of study is our whole class instruction, but really, like, the secret sauce is the small group instruction and the specific strategy instruction that's occurring there. Students use tools like anchor charts, like the reading progressions, with exemplars, again, for what, especially with written response, what does it look like when you're making an inference or when you're synthesizing, or you know, what is a good response for prediction, or all of those skills. And then they apply them to text with increasing independence during independent reading and during small group instruction. And again, these skills are also thoughtfully embedded in our read aloud and writing about reading and student discourse. So next steps for us, again, we'll review resources on the state approved list. So another part of the waiver feedback tool, the state said that our curriculum model or program does not allow for high quality daily differentiation of foundational skills so that all students achieve mastery. And they said in their feedback that our documentation referred to the units of study to address, but there was no indication of how foundations and Heggerty will play a role in addressing this as part of our planned curriculum. So I will say this is where it's a little bit hard not to have a back and forth discourse where they ask questions and we have an opportunity to answer, because as I said, we use those progress monitoring tools, those where we constantly assess students in a variety of ways, and teachers pull small group. So if a student is, for example, if there's a foundational skill, they may use Foundations, they may use Heggerty, they may use UFly, they may use another one of our resources. We have a compendium of resources that we use for targeted small group instruction. So that's just a hard thing to explain without that back and forth discourse. The state said that our program does not include a wide range of authentic writing with explicit instruction in writing skills and strategies. The feedback there was that we provide topics for what students will write about, but there was no explicit information on the how of that explicit instruction. And again, I think that the units of study curriculum is aligned to grade level writing standards, and they are explicitly taught through strategy instruction. And what strategy instruction means is a skill is broken down into a specific strategy, and the steps are laid out for kids. So this is how you generate ideas. This is how you plan and organize a piece of writing. This is how you draft and revise and elaborate. And there are a myriad of strategies that teachers use. The one area that we do know that we need to strengthen is grammar instruction. And that also is something that we have been looking into. And the last thing that our program, according to the state, does not represent various cultures and perspectives, promote cultural affirmation, and value diverse identities, backgrounds, and perspectives. And their feedback was that we did include a list of the diverse text read alouds, but no indication of how they were used within the comprehensive design of our program. So how they are used is that they are read aloud across the year and they align to each unit of study. We have a very specific plan in a Let's Gather is the name of the resource, but they have plans for those interactive read alouds and for shared reading. And again, those two components are specifically designed to support reading comprehension, discourse, and fluency with shared reading. We have also had a focus in the last few years specifically on adding diverse text to our classroom libraries. And the decodable texts that we have purchased also have diverse characters and perspectives. So that's another area that to us, we actually think is a strength of our program.
So first and foremost, I want to thank Julie for her leadership in this area. The waiver was drafted and submitted before my arrival to Darien, and I know there was a tremendous amount of work that went into that. I'm sure through collaboration, not only with Julie, but with others throughout the district. It's also, I think, important to note that we're incredibly proud of our teachers. The job of being a teacher is not easy. If you think about, whether it's 18 students in the class, 19, 23, up through the 5th grade, what Julie's talking about is a mini lesson that's, 10 minutes of instruction and then a really talented teacher differentiating for what every student needs in the class. And we do believe that that is happening on the daily throughout our schools, throughout our classrooms, and that's because of the planning and our teachers who really know their students best. It's important to notice that. And we've said all along that there isn't really one program that can teach kids. It's the talented teachers who know the standards and who understand the craft of teaching and learning. And so we just want to make sure that we continue to have that as a focus and something that we're working on and being very aware of in district. It's also important, maybe we weren't clear about this in the beginning, when the waiver was first submitted and there was conversation about approved curricula, there were really only 6 programs that were approved. I viewed those myself and work in a previous district. Now, throughout this process, the state has drastically expanded the list of approved curricula and model programs. So that's fairly new and very recent information. Something also that we want to share with the board, and obviously we look forward to cooperating with the board in this area, is thinking about budget. The budget development and thinking about budget and grant funds who will help us. This will help us support our work in the next level of literacy advancement in the district. The ARPA Right to Read grant is not due until the end of this month. We had already submitted that grant and it was returned for revision, namely because originally we were not naming one of those 6 models. Again, now the list has been expanded greatly and there's an opportunity, like many districts throughout the state, to resubmit that grant. We won't be ready. The budget process, as we know, in school systems is very advanced because we're planning now for really the 24-25 school year. And we want to make sure that we don't make a rash decision, because what we do to adopt curricula, to vet resources, to support instruction, how we assess for literacy, how we support professional learning is something that we need to consider with great care. So I'm sure as Dr. Adley presents the budget with the board, we'll continue to have dialogue about the level of detail and decisions that we can and cannot make according to that timeline. Because we don't have to implement until 25, 26, what we really need to do is spend from now and then the months ahead really vetting resources and engaging in a process. And we believe it's very important for our process to be collaborative, to be authentic, to be genuine, to continue to be evidence and research based, and to involve the voice of our teaching staff and other stakeholders in the work. So that is something that we absolutely can and will and should be committing to. So that will be continued conversation, and of course, providing updates to the board about the grant as that's drafted. As far as next steps, we've identified best practices. Of course, in district, we're always looking at the teaching and learning process as art and science, right? In every area beyond even just literacy. We will be forming a committee to have stakeholder representation so that we ensure voice. That's really the only way I think we can make sure that where we land meets the needs of our students throughout the district and our staff. We have been and will continue to network with other districts. That's incredibly important. I think some folks, when you look at the districts that were approved and not, it's somewhat curious, right? Because there are other very high performing districts on that list who maybe did not receive even a transitional waiver. They received no approval at all. So there's a lot of curiosity here and learning and opportunity to do together. We'll continue to engage with the CSDE, although the feedback is somewhat limited. Really feedback, what's important there is that two-way dialogue. So we'll continue to engage with them in that. Something that Shirley and Julie and I all agree on is that we really need to be thinking about the link to general education, our core programming, and our colleagues and our students who receive supports through SCSS, through our special education services. So what can we learn from outcomes for students where the core program maybe did not meet needs, and plan for all in mind? The other piece that's incredibly important is the 6-12 continuum. So very often, right, we focus on throughout school systems, K-5, 6-12. But what can we learn as far as our students and continue to learn who have moved on to the middle school and high school about their success, achievement, and areas where maybe we have some gaps to fill? We have continued work to do with data cycles. The board's recently asked about SRBI. That's the conversation we should continue to be having. We will be looking at getting samples of other resources and learning obviously more about the expanded list of the approved curricula from the state. We will plan for site visits and especially networking with districts who have been implementing maybe some of those programs so we can get real information about implementation and what that sounds like and looks like. We will articulate and implement a plan for curriculum review. We will be piloting resources before we make any significant recommendation to the Board of Ed as far as full implementation, and continue to develop a communication plan and ensure that there is transparent and ongoing communication throughout. That will be incredibly important. And so at this point, we'd be happy to take questions, and we again just want to really thank our teachers who we know are providing really excellent instruction day in and day out, and who are doing the best they can to grow readers who are not only skilled readers, but readers who love reading and writing.
So thank you to Julie and Amy for their leadership in this capacity, and actually the board's engagement, which we'll continue to have. Just a couple of things. We will do this thoughtfully, just like, what are the options, right? If we just sort of like look at it, do nothing, right? We can't really do nothing. I can't do nothing. I can't advise the board to do nothing. That's not appropriate, okay? Because we are tasked with the education of the state, of the children, right? And so directions from the State Department of Education at some level have to be honored. Stay the course just with what we're doing. Pay lip service to it in the sense of purchase something, but don't really use it, because there isn't really a requirement of the implementation of and how you use it in every classroom. Or purchase something to complement, supplement the areas that we're talking about here. Simultaneously, there's what will run alongside this is the opportunity, I'll call it, to appeal, okay? But I do think we need to seek to understand more, because there are things here that we don't agree with the state. So I think that process, I think we have to simultaneously look at the programs, what they have to offer, look at them with all sincerity, right? With fidelity and in a serious manner and thoughtfully, but also simultaneously, I want to continue to seek clarity around areas where they have said they've differed on our opinion on it. These programs, just for the record, right? There's no evidence that they work. There's no evidence, like theoretically, in terms of student achievement data to suggest they work. I don't want to sit here 3 years from now and say we did these programs and we're even worse off. Who's responsible for those scores if that's the case? So we just need to go into this process thoughtfully, and we will. We're not dismissive of anything. We're not going to do that. But I at this point, I'm also thinking of simultaneously running the appeal process so that the State Board of Education, SDE, can give us some feedback on the areas where we think we would need clarification. I mean, up and down the system, Westport, Wilton didn't get anything granted. And yet some of them are doing what they think is relatively the same as us. Some of ours areas where they didn't support, other districts who we think were doing the same thing were approved, right? Or partially approved in a different area. So I do think we have to enter a process of really seeking to understand their feedback and make sure we're very clear about that, and we have an agreement about that. And if we don't, we have the option of going the whole way to the State Board of Education collectively as groups of superintendents or school districts, if we feel so inclined to do that. Our opinion is we work collaboratively with them, but also potentially use this process for appeal, just to learn more about the deficiencies that they have claimed. So with that, that's a bit.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Julie. So I think there's some disappointment from the district that this was the outcome of the waiver, but I also think we need to frame this as an opportunity. This is an opportunity to really look strongly at and critically at what we are currently doing, where we have holes, because we know we have holes. We've heard from Mr. Janosko that the vocabulary of the high schoolers is decreasing. Like we hear that there are places where our elementary literacy curriculum needs to be strengthened. So Alan, I hear what you're saying about an appeal and seeking clarity and clarification of what the state says. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that some of these decisions don't seem to make sense at all. But this is really an opportunity for us to look at what we have and where we can strengthen our programming. And I also want to make it very clear that the most important part of any classroom is the people in front of our children. And if there are people in the community that feel, oh my gosh, we were not approved, our literacy curriculum was awful, it is not because of the teachers. The teachers in our district are incredible and they work hard, but we have work to do. So I think I have more to say, but I will open it up to other people.
I just want to be clear, and I think you know clear. We are going to look at it as an opportunity to look thoughtfully. Yeah. Thank you.
Can I add one thing to that as well? We are, with our instructional rounds process, where we are asking teachers to come up with an inquiry question and look at instruction collaboratively. That's what we are modeling really with this. Like, we're looking at our program these are the areas that we have identified, even ourselves, which in many cases align with the state. What can we do to improve?
Go ahead, Greg.
Thank you. I want to echo what Sarah said, that I think the most important thing is for us to look at this as an opportunity, and it bears repeating. I think it's really important for us to come at this without being defensive, without being rigid. We continually ask our students to have a growth mindset, and that's exactly what we should be doing here as well. I also have a lot of questions. So to start with, I think my first question is, what does this mean for our relationship with the Units of Study program, and what historically has come out of Teachers College, I find it interesting that the areas that we were approved for were the areas that were not part of Teachers College. Those were the supplemental ones of Foundation and Haggerty, and that the areas that the units of study really focuses on, like comprehension, were not approved. I'm interested to know how this will impact our relationship on professional development. We learned last year that it's $100,000 that we pay for the partnership with Teachers College. That comes with, I think, 10 days of professional development that pulls teachers out of their classrooms. So I'm curious to know what our relationship might be going forward and how we're thinking about that, understanding. And Amy, I was very happy to hear you say that even with the timing of this and how it relates to budget, that you didn't want to rush the conversation and be thoughtful. I think that's absolutely the right thing to do. But I am curious, might we look at anything with the budget, specifically the amount of dollars that we have put in for Teachers College for next year? And as it relates to that, there was something in the slide that mentioned stakeholder participation. So I'm hoping, it didn't explicitly say, but I'm hoping that the teacher voice is imperative in that, because I do appreciate also the comments that both you and Sarah made about our teachers. I think that's right on point. And they are the ones who are in front of the students. They are the ones who are melding together those different programs. They're the ones who, for some of our veteran teachers, have maybe had the same professional development for Teachers College for 10 years, right? So how do they see that working with all the things that nationally, the attention that has been spent on science of reading and foundations, on phonics? So I'll pause there.
So I'll start by saying, well, first, thank you for the question, and thank you for connecting the concept of curriculum, curricular resources and instruction and assessing for learning also to professional learning. We've been talking a lot about that as a board and administration. Those things should always be linked. Change does take time and needs to be intentionally supported, right? So we certainly don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater because, as you indicated, some things have been working. But this is absolutely an opportunity for our district to think about what might need to be enhanced or where there are gaps. So as far as the relationship with TC and the funds that are related to the budget and this kind of late decision from the state with the waiver, we wouldn't want to make a full commitment to any one program or source, because what I think we really need to do, and as I tried to mention before, is really think about using this as an opportunity to explore the multitude of resources, and there will be a cost to that, right? Like, you want to try resources and vet them before you purchase across a grade level, across K2, K3, 4, 5, K5, across the district in 5 schools. So that would be the recommendation. So it remains to be seen, but as we've indicated, with a growth mindset and looking at this as an opportunity, it will be important to maybe explore other partnerships beyond TC. I want to make sure, though, that, again, we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The focus is on high quality instructional practices, not necessarily a provider or a curriculum. And as far as teacher voice, we recognize it is incredibly important to have teachers sharing what their experience has been with curriculum and with the resources, and also teachers informing feedback with regard to how we pilot new resources in the coming months.
Yep.
Julie, would you add anything to that? Or Shirley?
No, I agree with you. And I do think that, professional learning around the science of reading has been our focus, not about the program and the curriculum. It's not about the content. It's really about the practice and the modeling and the shifts that we've been making.
Thanks everyone for all the good work here. So I have a few questions and some of it's observations. So I looked at the waiver that was submitted, and there was a link to, I guess what's called, it's like the test scores that are called Connecticut's Motor Balance ELA assessment that are for 3rd through 8th grade. And if we look at those scores for Darien since 2015, it seems like, and this was cited in the waiver as a rationale for why we should be given the waiver. But if you look at the actual test scores, we've actually fallen more than almost any other district in the state. since 2015. And you might say, well, is that because the last year is 2021 to 2022, where it's right after COVID, but many other districts actually improved during that time period. So I am kind of intrigued by that data. And, in our next section, there's a great page that says using data to inform decisions, looking at results and data. It does seem like we've got a problem here. And I'm not getting the sense from what I'm hearing from everybody that there's an identification that we really do have a problem, not just related to this waiver situation, but more broadly in terms of the test scores going down and how we're performing vis-a-vis other districts in the state. So that's the first observation that I have. I would echo a lot of what Katie and Sarah said in terms of making sure that we do have teacher participation here. And I'd be fascinated in understanding what the teacher's view of the current curriculum as relates to this literacy program is, Teachers College, how they feel about the implementation of that, what their view of the alternative is, the science of reading, and then what the potential impact would be to those teachers, both in terms of teaching as well as what their view is for the students themselves for the implementation of what seems like a potential Band-Aid approach to this problem, where we're adding certain parts of science of learning, but not others. The last thing I think Dr. Adley referenced that that there's not any research that says that the science of reading actually has any benefit. I'd also ask, is there any research that supports that the Teachers College has benefit? So I think we need to question ourselves and what we're doing, particularly given the fact that our scores have gone down so much, just to make sure that we aren't headed down the wrong path already. And we haven't been headed down the wrong path already, given what's demonstrated by the data. Let's see, anything else? And I guess the last thing I would just say is, thinking about the impact that this has had, I don't know if any of these, and I'm not familiar enough with how these programs work, but if any of these have any impact with respect to special needs kids, dyslexia or otherwise. And, we've obviously seen a big uptick in the number of folks that are in those programs. I wonder if there's any correlation there as it relates to one versus the other. And then actually the last thing that I'll just mention is I think it would be really helpful looking at this presentation. There's a lot of background in terms of like what these programs are, but it doesn't seem like we have like a specific set of goals that we're going to try to achieve and like who's doing what the timeline is and how we're going to get to from point A to point B as it relates to turning the stem of what seems like a declining performance as it relates to literacy. That was a lot, but sorry.
So I think we need to, we got this decision on Friday night, right? So it's only Thursday. So I think we have this next step slide. I think we really have to flesh out in the coming weeks of how we're going to get from point A to point B. And part of that, I assume, would be creating goals and what we need to do and who's going to be responsible for those goals. I also think that as we talk about this, we need to be careful that it's not science of reading versus Teachers College. Like there is room for everything, and a holistic program should have a little bit of everything. And Amy always says this: there's not one size fits all program that will solve the needs for every child. So we do have to be cautious about how we talk about that. I know you wanted to jump in.
No, I just want to say, Mr. Grammer, I appreciate your comments, sir. I would like the opportunity sort of to follow up with you in a sense. We do comparisons of districts and test data and so on and so forth at the board level, and that's presented every year. But I want to make sure I understand what you're looking at, given some of your concerns there. And I'll be happy to do that.
I want to give Robin a chance to jump in.
And I echo everyone's views here. I think a lot of good points have been made, and thank you also for, especially my own personal experience with my kids went through the district in K-1 when we were not teaching Foundations or Haggerty and had issues with phonemic awareness. So I'm really happy that we are doing that. And I think that's actually a great example of how we can use instructional resources in a very systematic way that will help our kids. And kind of along that line, I do see this as an opportunity for specifically in the areas of vocabulary, grammar, reading comprehension. And what I kind of took from their feedback, and I think this kind of spans multiple areas, is that they were noting that there was not explicit information on how we teach in these areas: reading comprehension, vocabulary, fluency, and writing, and giving the students the strategic tools and skills in a very systematic way in those areas, because I understand what you're saying, that the teachers are going around in small groups and helping in a differentiated way in that way. But my concern with that, and what I would love to explore with these different curriculum models, is that they obviously have a lot of science and research behind them that addresses, hopefully, developing learners as well as advanced learners, that would allow us to maybe more systematically make sure that in every single day of a class across 5 different classrooms in a grade, we are consistently allowing that to happen. Because the way that we are currently doing it, seems to me, there might be room for, it really depends on what teacher you might have, how much experience they have in meeting all of these needs. And when you've got a class of 20 kids who might have varying degrees of advancement, if we are leaving it up to the small group method of instruction, the concern I have is maybe that's not allowing us to really systematically ensure that kids are getting the tools and strategies that they need in order to improve on a very consistent basis. And I kind of getting into a little bit more on the vocabulary piece. I had kind of mentioned this in past meetings. I kind of look at the model that we use for IDEA currently with our 3rd through 8th graders, and they're using word masters, where they have a list of 25 words. They define them, they learn the definitions, they get quizzed on them on a monthly basis. They do that through all of those grades. And in my mind, those are the kinds of things on a less advanced scale that we should be doing in our general ed student population, because it's a disservice, I think, to general ed kids that they're not getting that same opportunity to get that really foundational vocabulary kind of background. And as we know, in high school and going into college, that's incredibly important. Same thing with reading comprehension. I mean, I understand how you're saying, well, we'll learn this kind of through looking at nonfiction texts or in social studies or whatever. But I do think that there is a real skill involved that comes from doing systematic reading of different kinds of texts and saying, okay, then answering questions on it. And I mean, I know that that's very rote and it's not as exciting as, doing it through kind of a read aloud, but it does allow our kids to really get practice in that. And I think that kind of repeated practice is maybe something that some of these curricular models could help us to supplement what we're already doing. So those are just kind of my thoughts.
Thank you, Robin. I want to be cautious of time. It's already 8:45 and we still have 2 agenda items. And this will be on our agenda Tuesday night as well. So I kind of would like us as a group to think about how we can use Tuesday night and what we can take from this discussion and this deck and how we can frame it for the whole board conversation. I do think that budget question is going to be very important for the 9 of us to talk about and for everybody to be on the same page, pardon me. You were mentioning implementing a vocabulary piece already. Is that in the budget already? Is some of the, some of those questions that I have and the placeholder for whatever we're going to pilot and these new resources, just do we have a general sense of what that would look like? I think that's an important part of Tuesday's conversation. I also wonder how much more fleshed out these next steps can be by Tuesday. I know that's only, 4 days from now, 5 days from now, whatever it is. But, to Greg's point, can you come up with a few goals? Like is there a timeline? Like, even if it's a draft timeline, like where do you see this going forward? How do you see this going forward? And those stakeholders, who would those be? Just a little more detail on that. What do you think? Go ahead.
My one question I did have is if you're saying that the grant application, we are not going to be able to submit it. I'm just wondering from a funding perspective, does that mean we won't get any money this next year to help us pilot?
Thank you for raising that. I want to clarify, we will be able to submit that. The state has extended the submission date for the end of the month. So we will definitely be resubmitting the waiver, the application for the ARPA Right to Read grant.
And how much is the grant on a per year basis?
I believe it's around $72,000 each year for 2 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think my other question, and maybe this is not the time to discuss this, but so now your focus is going to be on this for the coming year. Where was your focus going to be prior to this? And what is that pushed out? And what does that look like? How does that adjust, PD for the coming years? what is being now pushed to the back burner, you know, and do we need to think about adjusting some of our goals and that kind of stuff? Anything further on this conversation, Katie?
Thank you. And I understand that we'll be talking about this on Tuesday and that we have more of an agenda. I would just say broadly for the board, I think that this conversation is critical. So I do want to just make sure that we are planning organizationally to allow enough time for it. I know we'll talk about it Tuesday, but whether that means that we need to have another subcommittee meeting with only this on the agenda, whether that means, you know, we need to space out the agendas on our other board members. I just want to say that this deserves a lot of time. The two other points that, and I have a lot of response to what we have, I'll save that for Tuesday. The two other things I just want to say for today, for going into Tuesday, is that one, I think the point of, you know, that Robin started to make, but what about the kids that didn't receive these programs, right? I know at least from sophomore up, it could be the entire high school from freshman up, that none of those kids, right, received any of the foundations, and certainly not the Haggerty. I'm not sure if anyone in the middle school has even gotten Haggerty. So how do we go back to those kids? Because our obligation is not just in improving for the kids to come, but is in all of our students currently. And so if we know that, you know, our high school students don't have the strength of foundation that they need in terms of vocabulary and grammar, what are we going to do about it? We have an obligation to them. And then the second piece is writing. And I know that was not thought to be the focus of this waiver initially, but again, I think it's an opportunity. So how do we address those foundational gaps? And specifically in upper grades, it's easier to do in the elementary school as they're still learning. It's a little harder in the upper grades, but it's also that much more important, right? Our students are writing papers and essays and letters, and they are definitely going to need to do them in college and even to get into college. So I want to make sure that when we talk about writing, that we're talking about the specifics of writing conventions, of organization, of structure, grammar, and spelling, that those things are truly necessary. For a long time, our focus has been on content, and that's wonderful that our students are bright and they have creative ideas. But if they can't communicate them into written word that is conventionally understood, then they're not going to be able to get to where they need to be in life.
Katie, to your first point, I think this literacy agenda item will be on the subcommittee monthly.
Yes, we had committed to that.
Okay, so if we think we're okay for now for this conversation, we will discuss more on Tuesday. And okay.
No, thank you for your feedback. Thank you.
Okay, we will move on to Mr. McGuire and instructional technology integration.
All right. Dr. Figgin, do you want to, I think we kind of talked about this slide a little bit already. I don't know if you wanted to.
Absolutely. So it
Speak to
won't
it
be a
again.
surprise. And actually, Katie, that was a great segue as far as children exiting, being able to communicate well. It's one of the key tenets of the vision of the graduate. So we agree. And Mr. McGuire he's just recently arrived actually after the start of the school year. And he will share with us today some parts of his work so far in instructional technology, and I'm sure that there will continue to be questions from the board that will inform the work to come.
Terrific. So thank you, Dr. Adley, and the members of the Board of Ed that are here today for inviting me to share a short update regarding instructional technology. I am Tim McGuire, your recently hired instructional technology coordinator, coming on about mid-September. It's been, actually, I really want to take this one. I get to hog the mic for a moment to thank Dr. Droller, Dr. Fettigan, Jeff Adams and his team. Thank you, James, Marge Sion. They've been incredibly supportive and helpful as I've been onboarding and trying to learn the ins and outs and how things work. So I couldn't ask for a more supportive group to work with. That's been fantastic. So my efforts this year are framed around progression in two documents you see on your screen here, the Future Ready Technology Plan and the Strategic Plan, but also continuing to support district initiatives that relate to technology, such as the Robotics After School program. So in the presentation today, I'll briefly mention some of the core ideas of the Future Ready Plan first, and the strategic plan as what I'm focusing on, and give some connected thoughts to current and future work around technology and instruction. The Future Ready Technology Plan. This is a well thought out plan that aligns with our district strategic plan, the vision for our graduates. Prior to my time here, and for those that don't have the background, the technology committee consisting of teachers, administrators, students, and parents, so a great set of stakeholders, worked together around 2018 to craft this guiding document. The plan has 7 strategic actions, but in short, it focuses on application of technology in instruction and assessment. In my first 3 months here, I've prioritized 4 of the 7 core objectives. I want to assure you my eyes are on all 7. For example, one of the objectives not listed here is titled Robust Infrastructure, and it features 5 sub-strategies. From my perspective, Jeff Adams and his team have knocked this out of the park. This area of the plan is in great shape. So I'm not going to mention it today. So looking broadly at these goals, it's not immediately evident that the strategies of the Future Ready Technology Plan seek to better communicate with the community, provide guidance to staff in the use of technology with students, and build a thoughtful process for the adoption of technology. All right, so let's talk now a little bit about the strategic plan. Similar to what I call the FRTP, the Future Ready Technology Plan, I've kind of focused my attention on 4 goal areas related to the district strategic plan. And while I wasn't an active participant in this strategic plan here in Darien, I have been an active participant both in the creation and implementation of strategic plans in 2 other school districts. I understand this work. So the goals, as is typical of any well-developed strategic plan, they have multiple action steps and different levels of assigned responsibilities. I am especially excited to partner with staff in support of professional learning. That's what I live for. I love that stuff. I hope to facilitate, develop guiding documentation, which we've already started to begin to do, related to use and integration of technology. And I have the opportunity to be both the ears and the voice at multiple levels for technology alongside decision-making to help inform things such as the budget process. Communication is a keyword that often comes up, and I'm looking forward to aiding this effort as well. Let's see here. So before I go on, and again, maybe this is more for those that don't have the background. I want to use this graphic to sort of see how I see things working together. So I see the Future Ready Technology Plan feeds into the strategic plan, which also then supports our vision for the graduates. My point of sharing this graphic with you is that none of the work that I'm doing or that the staff are doing here in the district is separate or standalone in nature. It all integrates together. So with that said, kind of got a little bit of a text dense slide here for you, but as far as a status update regarding technology integration, I have a table on this slide here, and you'll see a couple more similar slides. In the left column, you're going to see FRTP, short for Future Ready Technology Plan, alongside DSP, Darien Strategic Plan, followed by a number. That number is referencing the bullet points in my previous slides. So for example, FRTP2 is work in professional learning, while DSP7 connects to improving technology to support teaching and learning. So as you're looking at that, I will mention to you, I've had this year so far, I've had opportunity to provide some professional development, whole group sessions, small group, and one-to-one. I cannot emphasize how much I enjoy working with the staff in these roles. And I look forward to doing that continued work. Prior to my arrival, I know the district developed an after-school robotics program. I've had success relaunching that program. This year, we have 13 advisors, 6 are brand new, and we have activities at every school this year, reaching about 200 students. And if you're available January 20th, it's a Saturday, you can buy tickets for the high school competition at the National Havoc League and BattleBot competition in Norwalk. I intend to go there with my son that day. I think it's important to mention, again, my involvement on a number of committees where everybody has been extremely welcoming and supportive of my role coming in, and I've had the great opportunity to listen to them and also offer my feedback and insights so far. But it's people here in this district are very receptive to ideas and trying new things, but also offering their perspective as well. So I really welcome to continue listening and providing guidance there. Yeah, still on the first semester, things we've been doing so far. Later in this presentation, I'll showcase a screenshot of where we're housing some work related to privacy and technology guidance for staff, a newly created district department technology webpage. Thank you, James Flynn. Shout out to the side there. He's helped facilitate my work in that role. This resource will help not just district staff, but also Darien families identify available resources, and it'll include additional documentation as we develop it for guidance around the use of technology. I've had the opportunity to work with Dr. Droller and Dr. Fedigan to develop an elementary technology survey for staff. They'll take that on our next January Professional Learning Day. There is also one in works for the secondary staff. We won't be quite ready for the January Learning Day, but I'm going to work with the high school and middle school staff to facilitate when that'll be best happen, hopefully before the end of February for sure. Those surveys will help point to where I can support staff in professional development, but also it may help inform the budget process as well, where we prioritize our money and our dollars. So the next two slides are kind of where I see my work pushing towards later in this year, not just my work, the work of the district. And hopefully I can give you a better update. I believe in May, I'll be back for another round to give you feedback on how we've done here. But this is what I think happens next. So that is not to say everything on the previous slide is completed. For example, work on data privacy agreements is ongoing and will never be done, in that we're going to have new products that we bring on board and other things that we choose to sunset. The technology survey mentioned on the last slide is also going to help inform what some of the future work will end up being for me here. So when I mention ideas such as gather feedback, I heard the word stakeholders before, and you'll probably hear me say it again here. So we're looking to gather feedback from our staff, especially from our staff, they're not just from our staff, through multiple channels. This could be faculty meetings. I had the opportunity to sort of introduce myself at a faculty meeting yesterday for the middle school, earlier for high school. I'll be over at Royal tomorrow. Surveys are helpful, and we do make sure we are going to give staff dedicated time for this survey, so they have the opportunity to really provide thoughtful feedback. But also, I love the conversations I have, whether it's in a committee I'm on or a one-to-one conversation with a staff member or a small group. The District Technology Council, which is just had a meeting recently, that's going to be a great venue because I have representation from different levels, K-12, and also different perspectives, both teachers and administrators and members of the technology department. So hopefully you get the idea. We've got lots of channels of communication. Our teaching approach should accommodate the needs and abilities of all learners. This means developing a flexible learning environment in which information is presented in multiple ways. Students engage in learning in a variety of ways, and students provide options when demonstrating the learning. Technology has a role to play in UDL, and the folks in pupil services, hi Shirley, thank you so much for your help so far this year. They are a tremendous resource. All right. So I foresee continuing to build those relationships and working, especially with Lori Ritvo, who's been a dynamic, helpful person for me so far in understanding what's happening with technology and supporting learners with diverse needs. And to really also shout out your Darien staff. They are incredibly knowledgeable and effective. And I haven't had a chance to meet every single person or be in every classroom yet, but where I've been impressed. So they're very effective at identifying what works for them and their students. And I hope to continue to support that work. Another quick shout out to Jeff Adams. He's not here right now this morning, so I'm gonna make sure I ring his bell later for knowing that I really appreciate what he's doing. And he and I have talked about streamlining some processes. So as a specific example, he's been working hard on the side on a cost-effective approach to handle things like field trips in a digital format and medical forms. So database form work is frustratingly complicated, but if we're successful with this endeavor, we believe Darien will be the first Durgay school with digital field trip forms as an example. So hopefully make things easier for families. So looking forward, I've also begun to think about what might occur after the end of the school year. The ideas here are tentative, and I'm especially curious about your perspectives and your insight and the history that you already have, and helping me guide some of that future work as well. But when I look at our plans and the vision of the graduate, one of the things I'm really hoping we can do is start to market ways to involve the technology talents of the greater community. So as a specific small example, Greg Darren and the high school robotics coaches, Ross and Alan Lou and Ross Chapman, if you don't know them, they helped recruit a couple of high school kiddos to go help one of the elementary advisors. And so bringing that cross-building experience, that advisor felt so supported by having those high school students there to help her move the program forward. So that's the kind of thing I really hope that we can develop for more. I continuing to be excited about working with staff on more formal and informal training sessions, and I have thoughts about improving communication outreach through our website vendor. I also feel that we might need to look for additional feedback on a few larger initiatives, such as how it's going for the BYOD program at the high school and how I can support staff on technology practices with things like cybersecurity and data privacy. The strategic plan has a number of strategy areas that also need evaluation support, such as curriculum revision, embedded professional development. And yes, starting probably sometime mid to late next year, we need to consider the development of a new FRTP. And I can tell by your excited faces, everyone's going to want to join that effort. So thank you already for volunteering. Yeah, no, maybe, hopefully it will. And I feel this is an important slide to also help frame the thought around technology. So you may have a few questions related to data points, instructional technology, but let's talk evaluation of digital resources for a moment. So the graphic I have here is meant to be generalized, kind of starting on the left side, and most importantly, with whatever resources we're using, we need to ask ourselves, what are instructional objectives that we're trying to accomplish? What do we want the students to learn? And so as teachers that are looking at technology resources, they need to have an eye to ease of use and compliance with privacy laws, both state and federal, and to focus on learning. So some of you don't know this, but I've been a teacher and I was a teacher for a very long time. I've worked with technology resources and products, not to be named in a recorded video, that after I tried them with students, I decided, they didn't move the needle in learning, so we discard those, and there's a reflection in the process. So sometimes you try things and they don't work, we call that piloting. And so I really want staff to understand that we want them to try new things, but also be reflective. And if it doesn't work, hey, let's change gears and move to a different direction. So in the classrooms I've been in so far, it seems clear to me that the Darien teachers, they understand objectives and they have a focus on learning. I see really positive and appropriate use of technology for instructional purposes. I want to stress that this graphic shows instruction ahead of technology. Right? The essential idea is that technology is not driving our instruction, but rather an instructional technology resource should be supporting quality learning and instruction. So back to the graphic for a moment, the staff plans and provides instructional experience and then considers the results during and after instruction. So oftentimes teachers will know right away how it went, simply from their observations of their students, conversations they have with their students. They might be using exit tickets, feedback in the classroom, but also the technology tools do offer, a lot of them, immediate in-program data points. So the staff can look at what they have access to. And then from my side, from a reflection purpose, I can also look for a lot of programs at usage rates in some of our tools, such as Clever, which is our single sign-on service, or administrative panels that might be offered by some of the vendors. And let's, again, not forget our feedback from our stakeholders. And this is one of the things I've had some staff talk to me about, how they really want to make sure they have a voice in some of the decision-making. So the surveys, you'll see a screenshot in a little bit, will be helpful and that kind of thing. I've been starting to participate in some of the PLCs. For example, Librarians PLCs has been very informative. Something I call one-legged interviews. So if you want me to elaborate on what that is, I'm happy to do so in a little while, but feedback forms from PD sessions. So there's so many different venues where we can get some feedback from the stakeholders. And that should drive the conversation about our fidelity in use. So how are we using it in a way that makes sense of what the technology is, and is it supported by what's considered best practices? So a few specific examples here for you. This is not the entire survey, all right, but a couple, I think, key point screenshots that'll give you a sense of what the elementary staff are going to start providing feedback on. I think especially the one on the right, notice the list is grander than that, but it's giving a sense of what is some of their usage rates, especially in programs. It's hard for us to determine from more of a global perspective what the usage might be, but also do they want to learn more about it? So they have the opportunity to both tell us how their sort of perceived level of use, and also if they want to learn more about it. And again, this survey wasn't directly applicable in its current form to the secondary staff, so they'll have a similar one in nature a little later in the year. All right, and then let's see here. On my arrival, the technology department didn't have a web presence. So we now do, all right? And if you haven't yet, I hope at some point you'll take some time to browse what we have so far. Significant information is already available on the data privacy page, including links for all of our active privacy agreements with vendors, all right? And also some developing guidance for staff that will continue to be refined there. I also hope to provide staff additional understanding of a technology adoption process. And that's already started. That work has already started there. All right. So that is a lot. I'm wondering what you have on your mind, any questions related to technology integration that I can help to either address today or address for you in the future.
Thank you, Tim. I think what's on my mind is the thing that popped out for me the most, and thank you for highlighting it, is that you see technology behind human teaching. And I think that's really important because we get a lot of, as parents, I think we all kind of worry about the amount of technology in our children's lives, and technology is a part of the world now. We get it, but how do we use that technology in a way that is a support instead of the number one driver of what we do and how we do.
100% agree.
So I very much appreciate that. And I think as a board, we would like to understand more, how is technology being used as a support, and what are the guidelines that is being put on it in terms of time, especially with our younger, smaller people.
Right.
How much are they seeing even the quick, Go Noodles or those kind of things that how much of that is being used in our younger classrooms, because we do hear that from parents a lot. I will open it up for more. Katie.
Tim, welcome to the district.
Thank you.
It's really great to have you here today, and this presentation is fantastic. I could go slide by slide and tell you all the things that are so exciting. I do want to say that I really appreciate the robust and ambitious goals that you set for the first semester and beyond. There's really a lot of topical things on there that need to be addressed, and I appreciate you highlighting them. I also really like the way you laid them out with tying them to the technology and to the overall district. That was a lot of information communicated very concisely. I especially appreciate your comments about your love for one-to-one work and the importance of meeting with teachers. I think one of the most important things about making technology work for us is retaining that human connection.
Yes.
So I'm really excited to hear about how that goes forward. And I also couldn't let it go to not say that I appreciate your comments on partnering with the SES community as well, and making sure that we are really giving access to all our students. I did want to ask you, well, first building on Sarah's comment, I think the balance of screen time is an important conversation, especially at the elementary level. And I also think that it applies differently at the upper grades. As a board, we do receive questions and concerns from parents about this topic. One thing that we hear at the middle school level is really the presence of phones and personal technology. So I would love to see, a collaboration between you and that building administration to just acknowledge and address some of those things as appropriate for the district. Technology does mean very different things to a 7-year-old versus a 13-year-old to a 17-year-old. My question for you is how you see student involvement playing into this, because what I have certainly noticed is that for our students, technology is a first language, where most of us in this room, had to learn it at some point. In terms of a second language, these kids are just born knowing how to do things. You can take a kindergartner that can do things on any of our phones that we haven't done. How many times do we hear stories about a teacher running into a technology issue and a student being the one to fix it? So I'm curious how you see the students' involvement and participation in developing our path forward.
Great question. I still have a fair bit to tease out on past practices and history here, but I can tell you in a previous district, we actually had students current students and in some situations, former students that come in and provide participation on things like, I think the parallel here is District Technology Council, and at some point, perhaps I can reach out and get some student involvement there. I also am still learning how some information might be gathered from families and students, whether that's surveys or conversations. But I think one important idea is that if a student is saying something about technology, we really need to listen closely to what that is, particularly if they have a concern, whether it's related to usage and what they're doing in classes or complications, because generally speaking, the students embrace and are very open to using technology. So we do want them to have voice in this, and they are a stakeholder. So coming up with how we might get their greater participation, their voice is something to work on. So I'm making note of your point there on that. But also with technology and students, they're very eager to adopt Embrace, but I also want to emphasize that in my experience working with students, they know what they know, but there's also a lot that they don't know. So what we do definitely have things that we can teach them that use technology to facilitate that learning, but also courses, particularly at the middle school and the high school level, that more technology specific, they are learning skills there. So they might be fantastic at navigating and creating TikToks, but can they create a formula in Excel? Maybe not. So there's one of the things that I see as an objective I have that's not listed is really getting to know better what's happening where as far as technology instruction, and also related to digital citizenship, frankly. So also what's happening where I know things are happening. I've had conversations with people at all the different levels, but sort of getting for me, a bigger picture of how everything's connected and tied together.
Sorry, I was just going to say thank you. And also, if you figure out how to get teenagers to admit what they don't know, please let me know.
Oh yeah, no, I have two teams. So I have a high school senior and a high school freshman, and yes, I know this experience.
Thank you for this presentation. One thing that I would request is just that going forward, when we get updates, also having some kind of data or outcomes to show kind of along these goals, how we're doing and, what we're tracking, so we can actually kind of see how we're doing versus this basically a strategic tech plan, and, to measure it and kind of see where we need to do better. And relating that back in the most important area, which is instruction, and, are we actually helping our students with the use of the technology? And along those lines, I echo Sarah and Katie's questions, because my overarching kind of philosophy here is, like, especially in the younger years, I've seen the increased use of technology within our curriculum. And the concern I have is because the kids are on screens so much after school as well. I want to make sure that we're not losing the ability for them to learn to communicate and interact in person with each other, in writing and in talking and verbal kind of skills, and the increased use of the software for Brain Pop or whatever it is, where the elementary school kids are now doing things online instead of actually having a classroom interaction and dialogue, is one area where I just want to be careful to make sure that we are still teaching our kids to actually verbally communicate and interact. And then on the middle school front, one question I have is, because the Chromebooks, and I've had experience with this, because we're using so much more software and technology within the curriculum at the middle school, in many cases, the Chromebooks don't have the memory capacity or something to allow the students to use their Chromebooks to do some of the more interactive and heavy software programs. And I've had kids of mine who had to come home and use my computer because their Chromebook would keep crashing when they were trying to complete assignments, and they would lose all of their work and then have to do it all over again and multiple times before they finally came to me at 10 o'clock at night and asked to use my Mac. And so I think we need to be really careful about the expectations of teachers that they're putting on our students, especially with the Chromebooks, because the capacity in many cases does not allow them to actually do what they need to do. And along those lines, I've also heard that sometimes in middle school, because the Chromebooks aren't sufficient, the teachers are telling the kids to use their cell phones and to use their cell phones to access resources during class for an assignment. And so I've heard from parents that are concerned about, if they don't want their child to bring their cell phone or they don't have a cell phone in 6th grade or in middle school.
Right.
I want to make sure that we're really careful as a district about creating an expectation within our teachers' curriculum that kids are going to be bringing a cell phone to school and using that as part of a classroom kind of interaction or as part of completing an assignment. I would even, and I've had parents ask me if, can we say that cell phones aren't even allowed at middle school in Middlesex and they put them up on a wall and, when they enter class, because I do think that those can be a distraction. And again, it takes away from the interaction in class and the verbal dialogue that kids have. So those are just some kind of feedback and thoughts. And I'm all for technology. I just want to make sure that we're being really thoughtful about how we do it.
Yeah, and I think, like reference back to Brain Pop for a moment, there's lots of different ways that resource can be utilized. So helping staff frame something maybe in a more collaborative way. So, you could tell the students, hey, get your device and your headphones. I want everybody to go watch this video on your own. Well, you could use the resource that way, but a better way to use it, I can think of 2 other better ways. If everybody's looking at the same video, the teacher could lead that and pause the video and have a conversation, reflect and talk about the video. So using the same resource in the same video, but using a more collaborative way. Or an alternative ground is to pair and partner students up. So we could have students that are, watching a video together and then they're dialoguing back and forth about that particular video. And then they have to go back and share it to the group. So there's a way to certainly use technology for a more collaborative experience. I hear exactly what you're saying about the middle school and the cell phones. My child, that's now a freshman, was in middle school and he did not have a cell phone, an outlier. There was in that district also a similar frustration by some staff that the device wasn't meeting their instructional needs. So they were leaning on the students. This is a conversation that, is a big group conversation to have with the administrators and the staff at the middle school and also the technology department. And, if I'm not the decision maker on do we move from Chromebooks to other devices, but that is a budgetary and technology department conversation to have as well. So
just one additional comment. Some children, when they have too much time on screens and, if you're in an entire school day and it's literally constant like that, can get headaches, migraines, especially kids that have had concussions.
The research shows that.
And, if you are basically debilitating kids so that by the time they get home from school, they have a migraine and they can't do their assignments because of all the screen time, I think that's a concern.
Yeah.
And I've had that experience personally within our family. Just it's so much and it's so intense.
Yeah, especially the close screen time.
Yeah.
So,
thank you.
all right.
Thanks for the presentation. And I would wholeheartedly echo almost everything that Robin said as it relates to the utilization of technology in the schools. I think it's not just the middle school. It goes all the way to the elementary school. My nephew got an email about kids in his 3rd grade class who are using smartwatches during class to make phone calls.
Yeah.
It is a major distraction at the elementary school and through the middle school. And I think we as a district need to think about, do we have a policy around cell phone utilization in schools? And my understanding is that we don't. I think it's something that we need to think about and figure out what we should do around that piece of technology, because my kids don't have cell phones. I have a 6th grader. She does not have a cell phone. And she's doing great in school. And I think that I think we should think about what I think the number one thing on our strategic plan is mental health. And I think that there's been a lot of studies that have been done around the utilization of cell phones and screen time and the correlation with mental health for younger kids and how that translates into middle school and into the high school. And so I think that's a really important thing for our district to focus on. Specific to your presentation, I have one clarification question, then just a couple of other follow-ups. It says 2021 to 2024. Is the intent for the Future Ready Technology Plan to be done next year?
I think we have the understanding that I think it's the 24-25 school year is where this particular plan is intended to wrap up. And so hence we could look to create a new plan at that point.
Okay. Yeah. And I realized that you just arrived. So it's
Yeah.
like, that's kind of a short time period.
The concept of this particular plan, a 3-year plan, was actually born out of what the state used to require school districts to do, which states the state of Connecticut used to require school districts to make technology plans in order to support E-rate funding. And that, I think, was a concept discarded or 2014-ish, but it always had to be a 3-year plan. And so I think I wasn't here for this work, but I'm assuming that framework was kind of followed, partly because the things changed so much in 3 years.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then the follow-up, also kind of piggybacking on what Robin said as it relates to tracking, like as you are tracking the implementation of some of this technology, how do you think about cost benefit analysis? Is there a way to measure the benefit? And how are we thinking about, like, we're obviously expending a lot of resources within our budget. I realize that there's some benefits. You mentioned like being able to measure the budget and things like that, but how do you think about the cost benefit analysis, and are you tracking that as well?
Yeah. So I would love to say that the price shouldn't matter. And, as long as it meets the needs of students, but I also understand that there are some products we've looked at, they're like, oof, well, that's expensive. And I don't have an easy, 5-second answer for that particular approach. I think for every product, we have to look really closely at, is it effective? Is it working for students? Is it easy to use? Again, does it support the curriculum? And I know there are some decisions that have been made based on the cost. So, for example, I know they transitioned from No Red Ink at the high school last year to Quill, partly because of cost, and it was a similar product. Some of the stakeholders have since spoke up and said, hey, there's some things you didn't realize about that decision. So definitely cost is a concern, but what's the magic formula? I don't know if there is one.
Building on Greg's question, I think in your looking forward slide, you're talking about the BYOD at the high school. And I think the cost benefit analysis of that too, like that was a huge discussion at this table of whether or not, saving the money there by not giving our high schoolers a device, was that the right choice? And how is that working? And what are the limitations, if there are any limitations to that? I think the board would be interested to hear because we're in year 2 of that? Like, how is that?
And that's one that I'd also like to hear from the students on. Honestly.
Exactly. Yes, for sure.
And the staff.
Yeah.
All right. I think I've hogged your time here. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Are we all set?
Thank you.
Okay, we will.
I just want to thank Tim for his skills and his disposition. Have been very well received in the district from working with staff, kids, and just rollout of technology and so on and so forth. So thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. All right, we will move. Oh, sorry.
Sarah, do you want this presentation to go as is?
Oh,
or is
yeah,
there
sorry.
anything-
Good. Thank you for bringing that up. So you're coming back Tuesday night.
I will.
Similar to our last conversation about, literacy deck going forward. I think a condensed version of this.
You want me to trim some of it out?
Yes.
You got it.
I mean, I think because board members should be ideally watching this meeting, right? So everybody should be on the same page. So, if you could trim it a little bit and
I can do
then
that for you.
pick the highlights and maybe that looking forward slide and what going forward, what you see your role, how
Sure.
you see your role evolving and what you hope to come out of it would be great.
I'll save you some time. You got it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now I'm going Amy.
All right, thank you. And Tim, thank you. I would say one of the most exciting things about the work so far is that instruction comes before technology, but Tim is involved in nearly every committee that we have at every level in every district. I quite frankly don't know how he's spreading himself so thin, but it's really important that we're considering technology in all of the conversations and the balance of and appropriate use of. So that he's there to help inform that work. So if we can just go to our final agenda topic, which is job embedded professional learning with instructional rounds. And this is very well timed because we recently just had an experience at one of our elementary schools where we practiced this as a school district. And so we're really excited to share that with you and want to give a special shout out to that school community. But to start, we want to make sure that we're clear on why in particular instructional rounds can and is a high leverage professional learning experience for our staff. And really, when we think about instructional rounds and just professional learning practices in general, they're best practice and high leverage if we have the opportunity during professional learning to apply standards and research to our work, right? And the most important thing is that the work is targeted. Just like we want teaching and learning to be targeted to students' needs, we want professional learning to be targeted to staff needs and informed by data, informed by what staff is saying they need and what we can see students need. We also use professional learning to provide coherence. So in this case, in some ways, across the district, ELP through grade 12 plus, at the most recent elementary level, certainly coherence across the 5 elementary schools. This provides us an opportunity to really leverage areas of our strategic plan to focus on our goals for continuous improvement, support collaboration. I think one area of our work is to continue to support collaboration across the district, across levels, elementary school through middle and high, but also grade level collaboration across the district, right? Sometimes the world of teaching can be very lonely because, you know, you're in your role or you're in your classroom, and that side-by-side work is incredibly important. We also want to make sure that when we're providing professional learning, we're setting contextualized learning goals, and that most importantly, there's an immediate opportunity to apply what we've learned right away, right? So often we hear throughout this world of teaching and learning that there's a professional learning experience, doesn't really apply, and then you go back to the classroom and you're doing what you did. We want to make sure that we have evidence that professional learning is attached to goals and that there's evidence of direct application and then reflection on how that application has worked out. So just really briefly today, I want to share with you in particular the work of instructional rounds as an embedded professional learning opportunity, namely what they are, why this is a research-based practice, how it supports our work in the strategic plan, why the school and district is involved, and how participants have been learning about this experience, and just how to work rounds logistically. It's a major commitment and does take a lot of coordination. And so we'll tell you what our current experiences has been after we identify what it is. So instructional rounds is a process that requires groups of educators to examine their own and others' instructional practice closely. It's disciplined, it's intentional, there's a focused protocol that you use, and there's a lot of look at data from the observations or the visits to different classrooms that would indicate how we're doing according to an improvement cycle, really a question that the host school has set out. What this really means is it's breaking down the walls and private practice of teaching and learning so we can get into one another's spaces and learn from one another. This is connected, and we've been talking a lot about this as a board and administration, to goal 4, expanding professional capacity of staff. We've talked many times, even just during this curriculum committee meeting, about the expertise within the district and how do we leverage that expertise to support one another in practice. So doing so helps us provide a common understanding of the work, focuses the work, and really puts educators in lead of their own learning. So this is really an opportunity for teacher leadership and for administrators to learn side by side with teachers, which is incredibly important. So here's how it happens. To unpack the process, we gather as a group of colleagues. They're referred to as an inquiry team. There's a lot of language in the research that talks about a problem of practice. What we're referring to in this district is an instructional inquiry question, because we want there to be a clear and deep focus to instruction. We want to demonstrate and model aligned to the vision of the graduate, being curious and approaching our work through a lens of inquiry. And it's always connected to the school improvement strategy. We determine which classrooms will be visited in small groups, typically of maybe 4 to 6 educators from the inquiry team, which may be a grade level team, it may be across grade levels. In this most recent case, it was across the school district. We think about, the school team thinks about an inquiry question, and we'll talk a little bit about how they establish that, but the visitors think about the strengths that are noted, the needs that are seen, and then we help to prioritize the next level of work. An application to practice. So we've talked about an instructional inquiry question, and that is something that the host school cares deeply about. It's aligned to not only our district strategic plan, but the school improvement plan. It's always focusing on an instructional lens. It must be observable, and we have to be able to provide actionable feedback from the visit. When we think about high leverage strategies. So we always want to also be making sure that the instructional inquiry question is attached to a framework and something that is supported through research, right? So if it's around small group instruction, specifically, what do we mean by that? What are the key tenets of effective small group instruction, for example? We want to have a shout out to Holmes Elementary School, because Holmes hosted, they really are leading this work. Last year, they hosted an instructional rounds opportunity for their staff. This year, all staff, ELP through grade 12 plus in varied roles across the district, participated in a common professional learning instructional rounds initial training session, I guess is what you could call it, really to make sure that we have a common understanding of the protocol and practice. That happened mid-November. And then from there, Holmes really led the work in once again this year offering and opening up their school to educators around the district. We visited classrooms across the grade levels, including art. We were all over the school, really focusing on their question about how instruction is being met to be tailored to meet the individual needs of our students. And we used a framework for small group instruction and what research says about small group instruction. So that happened at Holmes, most recently on December 4th. We were incredibly grateful that we were able to logistically provide coverage. So there's always, when we talk about cost benefit, right? When we remove our educators from a classroom experience, that is a big commitment that they're making. It's hard for them to leave their kids even for a day or half a day, not only to develop subplans, but they miss them and they know that they're on pace with teaching and learning efforts. So that's a commitment and a bit of a sacrifice, but the benefit of learning from one another and being in shared dialogue around what we're seeing in the next level of work is incredibly important. We're looking forward to visiting Darien High School on December 18th. Roughly, there will be another 30 faculty members, staff and administration, teachers and administration involved in those rounds visits. And right now, Mrs. Dunn is developing with her team the instructional inquiry question. So we'll be able to, in short order, come back to the board and share what that experience has been like. And then our strategic plan also includes this idea of embedded professional practice, growing the capacity of staff, teacher leadership. Each school is committed to, in year 3, implementing their own school-based instructional rounds from this experience. So we've had this common experience all together as a district, ELP grade 12 plus. We've had a focused elementary shared experience. We'll have a focused secondary experience, and then we'll continue to apply what we've learned. And then really, what is the outcome of this learning experience as we go forward throughout the rest of the year. So that's a really quick summary of that work. I'm excited to share that when the teachers at the elementary level left on, this is just anecdotal data, right there. I don't have a spreadsheet or a pie chart to show this, but I said to each group, and there were at that point, the 5 represented, what, on a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable do you feel to lead this work? To look at your school improvement plan, develop an inquiry, an instructional inquiry question, and to share this work with your colleagues and get out in front and lead. And all said, at least an 8. And I think their only hesitation was sometimes it's hard for us to stand up in front of our peers and to take a risk, right? And to break down those walls of private practice. But they left really enthusiastic. And the commentary was, we should be doing more from this. We need to be learning more from one another. So we'll be looking forward to sharing future updates with the board about this important area of our work.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you for those at Holmes for participating in the first one. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Teaching is very lonely and you can be very contained and you can get very set in your ways. And I think getting outside and seeing from your peers is really, really important. So I think I'm excited that this is happening and will continue. I know that or correct me if I'm wrong, we brought in an outside consultant leader to start this off, to kick this off, right? Do you anticipate that going forward, or do you now see that like we're done, we know what we're doing and we can do it internally now?
Right. Thank you for that question. We did. We collaborated with Dr. Alicia Bowman from Cass. She's a former district leader in Farmington, I believe, and she is doing some important work around the state at Cass. The reason why we brought Alicia in is because she actually is in the book around instructional rounds because she had great success in her previous school district. And also just sometimes it's important to have, of course, I think this is incredibly important. We hope the board does too, Alan does, but to have somebody that is outside of our organization sometimes who's experienced success with this and who also can communicate the ins and outs of that success, not only to administration, but to our teacher colleagues, it's really important. And another thing that I want to highlight is Alicia, as a former central office administrator, completely understands the value in learning for this, not only for teachers, but for all of us as administrators. We are learning with and from our teachers in this practice. To answer your question specifically, now this really is led, it's district led, it's school-based led, and ultimately this will be teacher led.
Great.
That's where we're going, and we're really there.
Thank you. Questions, Katie?
Thank you for this, Amy. This is really exciting. Question for you, and kind of tying back to our earlier literacy conversation, is what is the continued plan for that elementary-wide collaboration, ensuring that we have common practices across individual classrooms, but also across buildings and throughout the district?
Thank you for that question. And I want to make sure, Mrs. Stroller, you jump in at any time because Mrs. Stroller is certainly leading those efforts. One of the things that is first and foremost important is for us to continue to involve our administrators in the work of professional learning. I, as assistant superintendent, have to deeply understand, as do our administrator colleagues in the building throughout central office, what does our curriculum include? What are the instructional practices that we're leveraging? How do we assess for learning? So that's first and foremost. When we think about coherence and implementation, something that's incredibly important. How do we all talk about the work and make sure that we're understanding the same thing? Because otherwise we can provide feedback that sends mixed messages to our colleagues, right, to our staff. The other piece is we do have grade level leaders, and we have PLCs that are all focused on the school improvement plan, and each of the school improvement plans have elements of literacy instruction that they're focused on. So those are some also embedded professional learning opportunities, and something honestly we'd like to come back to the board with to share more about PLCs. Those PLCs should be teacher initiated and teacher driven and focus, but also always aligned back to the district improvement plan and the district strategic plan and the school improvement plan. The work of professional learning that happens not only on the big days like November, January and such, but more importantly, how we're using experiences like embedded professional learning to ensure that we are having a shared understanding of common practice and it's actually what's being implemented. And that together we're looking at outcomes and making adjustments where needed. So those are, I think, some of the initial ways. What would you add to that, Mrs.? Oh, one other quick thing, sorry.
Okay.
The work of the interventionists, Mrs. Stroller, I attend as much as I can, leading the interventionists who are working day in and day out with our teachers and our students to really look at data, to look at the practices that are being implemented and where we need to make some shifts. That's another way to provide a consistent focus and a more close look on what the outcomes are and what we need to do differently maybe.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say. Some of the structures that we have in place, the principals and I meet weekly. Often Amy and Tim join us. Kristen O'Reilly joins us so that we are cohesive, and our literacy and math teams meet twice each month, and we have administrators on those teams. So often when we end, we'll leave with, okay, so how are we bringing this back to our schools? And we have a written next steps for everybody. So that ensures cohesion as well.
Great, go ahead.
I would just say anything we can do to foster the teacher community that, I think effectively would help to help our retention, help our hiring for excellent teachers. I think it's great. So this is a great program. I just had one clarification question. Are there specific topics that are, or specific subject areas that are covered in this? And if you could share those with us just to make sure that those align with the district goals, I think that'd be really helpful.
Sure, absolutely. So we're always making a connection from the strategic plan to the school improvement plan to actually teacher and administrator goals and student learning outcomes. But each school develops an instructional inquiry question that is based off of their particular needs needs for their staff, and also needs as evidenced by student learning outcomes. But as those are developed and as schools actually engage in the instructional rounds, we'll be looking forward to sharing what those instructional inquiry questions are and have been, and what the outcomes of the work, and really most importantly, it's the identification of the next level of work. And you end the instructional rounds experience with the host school reflecting on what they've heard and naming what the next level of work is that they'll explore and be committed to. So yeah, we'll continue to come back and share that with the board. Thank you for the question.
Does every teacher participate in instructional rounds, and how does that work? Can you say, nope, I don't want visitors in my classroom, or how does that work?
So one of the things, it's interesting because we're reading this text, Trust and Inspire, with our administrative team. And I think one of the things that's very important in our work together in teaching and learning with students and staff is to find our why in the work. And that when we think about compliance and doing things because they're a mandate, they're not usually the most productive and effective and successful. And don't really contribute to achievement ultimately. So in this case, we're really looking for first adopters, and we've been happy to share that we should be happy to share that there are in each of our schools. What's most important is nobody is opting out of this. It's a part of our strategic plan. We've identified this as an area of continuous improvement and a leverage for continuous improvement. And ultimately, even in the initial training, we had part of it is an issue with substitutes. Okay, so we have 2 teachers from each elementary school. We have interventionists, we have administrators. At the secondary schools, there are even more because they're larger schools. But then as the work moves into the buildings, it will expand. So at homes, there were 12 classrooms visited. That's a large percentage of that school, plus all of the staff that was actually participating as those who were lucky enough to be able to visit the classroom. So it's I think something that's blossoming, and the butterfly effect and something like this is pretty quick. Okay, but there isn't like an opt-out of instructional, there's not an opt-out of professional learning.
Great, thank you. Robin? Oh, sorry. Shirley was gonna add on.
I think this is great. And I just had a couple questions. First of all, how is the teacher feedback given after the instructional rounds, and who does that? And then secondly, how is this different than like a teacher performance evaluation?
Okay.
I mean, because I'm sure that they might think, oh, this is going to be an evaluation on how I'm doing versus really a learning opportunity to share best practices. So how do you kind of make sure that you're achieving what you want?
I'm so glad that you raised that. So to be very clear, instructional rounds is not about evaluation. This is not an evaluative exercise in the school. It really is through the lens of professional learning. And as a matter of fact, when we were visiting homes, while we were looking at the instructional inquiry question of that school and wanting to provide them feedback to consider for their next level of work, our primary goal in that experience was to learn about professional learning through instructional rounds, right? And how to leverage that. So to answer that question, there isn't feedback that's given to an individual teacher.
Okay.
So there are very clear protocols that, you don't interrupt the teacher's instruction. You can speak to students when it's not interruptive to ask them what they're learning, what they're working on, because that's another way to get data, right? To hear from the students about their thinking and their experience in a learning process. But there is no discussion of what happens in the classroom out in the hallway. When you go back to the group to look at the data that has been collected through the observations, it's depersonalized. There is not like the teacher's classroom or the teacher's name attached to it. You're really looking for trends around the question that exists within the grade level or school, wherever you're actually exploring. Our teachers ask the same question because I believe every one of our teachers is doing great work and wants to do really well. So they're like, well, I get feedback, and they're curious about that, but that's not the intent, and it's not how the process works, because it's not what it's meant to do. So there really isn't a way. We don't have data that is given to a specific teacher after, because it's designed differently. But to answer that question, it's really about the collective question and the data that everybody, all the visitors from across the classrooms, can kind of synthesize toward that question.
I mean, but as a follow-up, I'm sure that you're getting very important data that I would think would be helpful to be shared in certain cases. And I understand you don't want to kind of mix the two, but as part of your depersonalized outcome analysis, if you find certain things that are really, really good that some people are doing versus things that we could improve, is the hope that you would then share all of that feedback, whether it's
So that
positive
does
or growth
happen.
areas, and then the teachers would find out and they might be able to say, oh, well, actually, I was doing this, or I realized I wasn't doing this.
So
or-
that does
Okay,
happen.
okay.
As a matter of fact, after the debrief with the instructional rounds experience, the whole faculty will have the opportunity to learn from that. There were some things that teachers noted from having the opportunity to be in colleagues' classrooms, and they said, I never thought of doing it that way. Is it okay if I follow up with that teacher and ask? And so this does really foster, to use that word, collaboration across grade levels and across classrooms across the district. The actual debrief with the faculty is the data is shared along the instructional inquiry question, and trends are discussed, and the identification of next level of work is discussed with the whole group.
Great.
So that does happen. And then we also are collecting feedback from our staff just about the process. So what was your experience, either having people visit your classroom to look at teaching and learning there, or your experience as somebody who was lucky enough to participate with others opening their doors? We're getting
Is it
feedback that way too.
random, or do they know that they're going to be visited?
This is like a no surprise party policy. So
Okay.
they do know, and they're not meant to change anything about their plan for that day. So if whatever it is that the instructional inquiry question is, where we're coming in, whatever the schedule says, and the teacher is mid lesson typically.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Sure.
And that, just to add back to Mr. Groundling's question, is it discipline specific? It may be, depending on what the inquiry question is. But on our visit to at homes, which is a great example of that, we had an opportunity to look at small group instruction. We were looking at that in different environments. It was in the general education classroom, it was in an SRBI program, depending on which team you were on, or in a resource room. But the methodology is what you're looking at. So I'll just give an example into some of your questions earlier, Rowan, about differentiation. So, and you do take away and want to share because it was a very exciting lesson, and you can't help but want to talk about it and share it with other teachers and other stakeholders. So the example is, it wasn't about the literacy instruction. It was about how that teacher was achieving it and differentiating it. So in this particular example, this particular teacher was able to she had different questions at different partnerships. So children were in small groups, and depending on their level, to your question earlier, Robin, about how do we differentiate for very accelerated learning and for very leveled learning and for challenging and being able to provide that. So the methodology is different questions where actually there are partnerships of 2 children or maybe 3 children, which are really nice small groups. The teacher was working with one group while the children were facilitating their own conversations in a written language activity, had their own questions the teacher had designed previously, knowing who those learners are. So she's able to meet all of her students at all of their levels. It happened to be a literacy lesson, but it could have been a math lesson, or it could have been a history lesson or a science lesson, but was able to differentiate because she knows her students, because she's really utilizing that specific meeting students where they are, and she's able to really meet with them after and have a conversation about outcomes of work. So I think the exciting thing about instructional rounds is that's the intention. The intention really is looking at strategies and methodologies, sharing them with peers, opening up doors among teachers. And I know we took away many different things that we were excited about learning as learners ourselves. So I just wanted to answer that question and to your point as well.
Thank you. Do you have more? Oh, okay. I think we're good. All right. Thank you.
Just to comment, I love how you set up the questions. I think from Shirley's answer, it's clear, but it's not clear from the presentation who was involved. And I think it's important to emphasize that this is all folks who give instruction in the building, is from what I am gathering from your answer. I think that's an important thing to understand.
Also for Tuesday, would it be possible to have, excuse me, an example of an instructional inquiry question? Because that would be helpful just to give an example of what it is that they're looking at.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. We are almost at 2 hours, so I will turn over to public comment.
At this time, we'll entertain public comment. Please keep your comments to under 3 minutes. For our online participants, please use the hand raised icon. You will be recognized by your screen name and invited to ask your questions. First, do we have any in-room audience questions? And do we have any raised hands on Zoom today?
No? Okay.
It's very good wait time.
May I have a motion to adjourn, please? Katie, second by Robin. We are done. Thanks so much.